Hello planters, how are you guys doing today? If you're new around here, my name is Ashley and I'm a soil scientist. On this channel, I like to take that science and apply it to all things plants. And on today's video, we're going to be talking about plant imports and some of the things you can expect, how to alleviate those symptoms, and exactly what you should do upon arrival of the plants all the way to getting them in pots and into your living room. If you want to learn more about the plant science and the soil science of your hobby, then this channel is for you. So be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and give this video a thumbs up. When your plants arrive, they've obviously come from a tropical country. In this case, these plants have come from Thailand and they consist of aroids and Hoyas. These tropical areas have lots of sun and very high humidity, but then to top it off, they traveled in a package that was probably sealed with plastic and sphagnum moss, high moisture, and lots of plants jam-packed in. So we went from relatively high humidity to very high humidity in some cases, all the way to a cold climate or a Canadian climate where the moisture level has decreased drastically. The first thing you are going to want to do, because they were probably bare rooted or they were rooted in paper towel or sphagnum moss, you are going to want to rehydrate the plant. You will want to do this regardless of the leaf type or how the plant looks. For something like this grandiflora Hoya, the leaves are very thick, and so when he arrived, his leaves were firm. Same thing with my Monstera, Spider-Man Monstera. This guy, very thick leaves, and so he didn't show any signs of dehydration. However, your more vocal plants that have thinner leaves, such as this Stingray Hoya here, was very floppy, and then something like the Micans, philodendron Micans, this again was very floppy upon arrival. Regardless if you have no roots, bare roots, or roots that have lots of sphagnum on the bottom, do not manipulate the roots too much. Don't start pulling away the sphagnum moss or any of the growing material that has attached to the roots. Simply place the whole plant into a container of water. For the container water, you're going to want to leave them in there for 24 to 48 hours. You will notice probably after the first 24 hours that the water has changed color. It'll probably turn yellow or brown, and this is simply the dead cells off the roots kind of sloughing off into the water, which is causing that off clear coloration. Simply just dump it out and new water in there. The reason for that is because we just don't want any mold or mildew building up, and because they're dead plant cells, that will eventually start to mold or it will go bad. So we just want to give it its best bang for the buck, and you want to put new water into the container. The difference between tap water and distilled water, I haven't noticed much of a difference in my experience, but you may want to consider using distilled water for some of your sensitive plants or plants that have been traveling an extra long period of time. And the reason for that is because there's no salt in distilled water. Salt is very poisonous to plants, and tap water has salt in it. So whether it's fish tank water or something from a jug, that may be your best choice. That is what I use for these guys upon arrival. I use distilled water for them, just to prevent any leaves from falling off or losing any leaves from the shock of what I would assume in Thailand would have been probably not as heavily filtered water compared to something like our tap water here where I am has chloramine, for example. So just to lessen the blow, lessen the amount of stress, I use distilled water. So besides putting them in water for 24 to 48 hours, you will then want to also seal them off somehow, whether that be in a Rubbermaid, such as this one that actually seals with water in the bottom, or in something as simple as an old Swiffer container with a lid on top. You will want to bring up that moisture as high as possible. Like I talked about, the high moisture from the packaging, and then also the high moisture that they came from in Thailand. We want to make sure that we're trying to make the change as gradual as possible when it comes to the gas exchange of the plant and the atmosphere around it. Because it was high humidity, its guard cells reacted and acted a certain way. Same with the stomata, and the hormones and just the triggers that the plant was giving off was based on probably 100% humidity. If we take them and we put them directly into 50, 40, 30% humidity in some cases, what ends up happening is we shock our plants and the stomata and guard cells, and we end up with an imbalance in the gas exchange, therefore respiration, and in some cases can cause severe dehydration or other issues. So that is the purpose of the Rubbermaid method, or any of these methods. It's going to lessen that stress and lessen that change. Over time, we can gradually begin to leave the lid off, for example, for so many hours a day, and then eventually we can take the lid off entirely and just have the water or the shielding on the sides that will keep the moisture up. And then over time, we can transfer them to our living room. We're gonna wanna do that over approximately a month, but for that first week for sure, until you start seeing new root development, you're gonna wanna keep them in a fully sealed situation. One of the simplest and cheapest ways to do the sealed situation, if you have a smaller plant, is actually with a paper or a plastic bag, like a sandwich bag. That works great. Like I said, Rubbermaid takeout containers, anything of that nature. The biggest thing is you want to make sure you have a clear top, and that is because we obviously need to start letting some sunlight in. These plants have been starved for sunlight, and so we do need to provide that, whether artificially or naturally. So we do want to make sure it has a clear top. The sides and the bottom, it doesn't matter as much if that's clear or not. One of my favorites is actually the roasters that have the tinfoil sheen and then with the plastic top. Those ones are the best because that's actually refracting light and it's keeping the moisture in. One of the things you will note before you go to actually plant these plants in whatever sort of growing medium you're going to put them into, we'll talk about that a little bit later, is the actual roots themselves and what they look like. In a lot of cases, this guy I've had for a little while now, so you're starting to see some new root development, but in a lot of cases, your roots are going to kind of look like this tan, black, brown type root, but you will notice that they are hard and fleshy. They are not mushy. And the reason for this isn't because those roots are dead or those roots are bad necessarily. What has happened is we've lost all our root hairs on the actual root itself, and that's just through the rubbing and the friction of shipping and handling and everything of that nature. The root hairs will slowly start to slough off, and we end up with more of an air root situation, which has caused a large buildup of dead root cells on the outside of the actual root. These root cells, as they start to accumulate on the actual root itself, will eventually start sucking up the dyes, the natural dyes around it. And so peat moss, for example, will cause this kind of off-colored root. These are not bad roots. If you actually put these and root them with these roots, you will notice that you'll get little tiny white offshoots off this main one, and that's because this is very much so alive. If your root is dead, it is going to look something like this. It's going to be very floppy, it's not going to have any structure, and it's going to be very mushy. Roots like this you do want to remove. So I suggest before potting these up, you're actually going to go through and just kind of pinch each and every single root and feel what they feel like. If you have any sort of mushiness in an area with discoloration, simply just give it a snip and remove that root from the area. Try to keep as much as possible. Just because it doesn't have the root hairs, which are obviously very essential to nutrient uptake, they actually carry a negative charge. That negative charge is what brings the nutrients and the water into its profile and helps it grow. Just because it's missing those doesn't mean the root itself is useless. Dead root cells actually serve their own purpose, and the plant is designed to have those in some capacity. So do not remove the roots, those are still of value. The next step you're going to want to take before actually planting these plants into any sort of substrate is checking over your leaves. So you will have a natural amount of damage due to shipping. So for example, this hole in this leaf here, this is normal, that's due to shipping. You're not going to want to remove that leaf for any reason. However, if you're noticing that a node or a leaf is beginning to yellow, so this here, you can see a yellow end. This had a leaf coming off of here that immediately began to yellow after that first 48 hours. I completely removed that leaf. What I should have done is actually removed the node, because you're starting to see here, I've got new white roots here, but this node here, this root while still alive, the node while still alive is probably not going to make it. So I will actually probably remove this node, this root combo, and I will just keep this node, these roots, because these ones are showing action, this one is not. This one may perform as a wet stick, but it may be too far gone. The purpose for removing any sort of yellowing leaves, especially if we're starting to yellow starting at the node, that means that that section of the plant is done, and we don't want to run the risk of rot. When we remove the leaves, we lessen the probability of nutrient being leached from the healthy leaf, the leaf that's actually respiring, doing photosynthesis, and actually trying to produce roots. We lessen the risk of the nutrients or the energy from that, the glucose from that, going into that yellow leaf to try to keep it alive and prevent it from failing. So if we just snip it, we cut our losses, and we can have nodes and leaves that are healthy. Focus on the task at hand, which is growing roots, establishing roots. So we've checked our roots over. We've made sure there's no mushy roots. We've looked at our leaves to ensure there's no yellow leaves or heavily damaged leaves. And then we've actually observed our nodes that are on our plants to make sure that there's no mushy or odd looking nodes. If there are, we have cut them off and removed them. Now we get to the step of actually potting these up before, again, throwing them back into the Rubbermaid. So when it comes to potting any sort of import up, we have, in my case, leca. I really like leca. You can also use sphagnum. You can also use perlite. You can also use vermiculite. You can use almost anything but potting soil and water. The reason for not using potting soil is because the actual gas exchange between the root profile and the plant is much too low. Because we don't have the root hairs on the plant, we don't have access to nearly as much of the soil porosity, meaning we have a lot less access to air that lives or resides in the porosity of that soil. That is the case with potting soil. When we use something like leca, I'll have a link for this down below in the description, an Amazon affiliate link for this. But if you use leca, we have much better breathability, and we don't run the risk of root rot due to lack of air exchange. And this works great if you do not have any root hairs yet established. So all these plants, none of which have root hairs. So this is our best option in the event of that. Sphagnum, same thing, very airy, very light. We don't want this wet. We don't even want it damp. If you can squeeze water out of it, it is way too moist. So you're going to literally fill it up with water, give it a squeeze, really wring it out, make sure there's no moisture in that sphagnum moss, and then that is what you're actually going to utilize with the plant. The reason for not enjoying water propagation is because without the abrasiveness of a substrate, we don't end up developing a thick enough cuticle on the outside of the root. The lack of the thicker cuticle means that when we take it from water and we actually place it into a substrate or a soil, we end up with signs of shock. And you're gonna notice the more root you get, the larger the signs of shock, because you have very tender, very young and fleshy roots that have not been exposed to any sort of abrasiveness, so they haven't built up that dead cell layer, and it hasn't developed a cuticle that's thick enough to be able to withstand movement and nutrient capture within a substrate. So if you ever wonder when you're doing water propagation why your plants don't respond as well when they start getting put in soil, in some cases they die off, it's actually because the root structure is not designed yet to be able to take any sort of substrate. So that is why I steer away from water propagation. A lot of people enjoy it, a lot of people like it. It's a great way to get roots started, but once they're started, I don't advise for it. I don't even wait for roots to start in water at all. I directly put them into some form of substrate. So I can do a whole video on just leca, but essentially you utilize leca the way you utilize leca with your imports. After about 48 hours inside of the bin, preferably in a warm spot, so whether that be near a register, in a grow tent, on a heat mat, whatever the case is, or having a light over top that an incandescent light that actually will heat the container, any sort of heat source that brings it just above room temperature. That's going to keep the humidity up. That's going to make the plant think it's time to actively grow because it's summertime, it's happy, it's go time. After 48 hours, we're going to want to look over our plants and we're going to want to inspect the roots again. So we're going to pull it out of the leca. We're going to want to inspect our nodes and our leaves. We are looking for any signs of rot. If there is any rot, we are going to want to remove the rot because rot just tends to spread and move its way up farther into the plant. So preventative measure, we're going to snip off anything that looks mushy. So after you've done all this, you are officially done and you can keep them in your Swiffer container, in your bucket, or whatever the case is for as long as you desire. And I'm actually serious about that, as long as you desire. You can leave them in there for a year if you wanted to. The important thing is that you're continually checking for rot, root development, checking your nodes, checking your leaves, all that stuff. If you're providing the right amount of light, you could leave them in the Rubbermaid for ages. You are going to notice you have drastically more growth in this scenario. Every time you change the environment, you change the moisture, you are setting it back a little bit. So if you have it in Rubbermaid, you're noticing some new growth, and then you suddenly take it out of the Rubbermaid or you start adjusting it to your atmosphere around you, you're going to notice you're going to stunt it. It's going to stop growing. And this is normal. That's a normal response. So if you want to get growth, you want to get more than just that single leaf, and you want to develop a bit more plant, then I suggest leaving it in the Rubbermaid until you feel confident in the amount of plant you have, and then you can remove it and put it into a little bit harsher of an environment, because that's essentially what you're doing when you're putting it into your home. But that's all I have for you guys on imports. If you enjoyed this video, let me know. I can do more videos on the actual specific plants I have. I have lots of little different unique ones that I brought in that are actually pretty hard to find in Canada, so I'm pretty proud of them. But I can do a bit more on the actual plants themselves, some of which are rare plants, unique plants, and yeah, just kind of the care behind them. Some of these I'm going to be switching out into the regular world, and then some of these are actually going to go into their containers and back into the grow tent. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. I hope this helps you if you end up with imports that are doing anything odd or funny. The only odd funny thing I had was actually with this Stingray Hoya. I kept on getting limp leaves. He was in a terrarium, and the terrarium wasn't even enough moisture, so I had to move them into this Rubbermaid, and the Rubbermaid actually has made it so that the leaves are firm and happy and healthy, so that seemed to make the difference. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!